I used to think fear was my biggest flaw, a crack in my bones that everyone could see. Not the kind of fear that keeps you cautious in traffic or respectful of the ocean's tide. Mine was a paralyzing, chest-tightening, throat-closing fear of flying. It started when I was 10, a turbulent flight that left me sobbing into my tray table while my brother Mark recorded me with our dad's camcorder. Years later, he'd edited the footage with cartoon sound effects and played it at Thanksgiving. Everyone laughed until they cried. I laughed too, or at least I faked it, but something inside me shifted forever. I stopped trusting the sky, and more importantly, I stopped trusting the people who should have shielded me. My parents had always seen me as the fragile one, the drama queen, the girl who fainted on hikes, who panicked on bridges, who needed to toughen up. Every protest I made was labeled as exaggeration, every fear treated like a performance. Meanwhile, Mark could stub a toe and receive a hero's escort to the couch. I learned early that fairness wasn't part of the family vocabulary, so I built my own. I studied hard, got out, became a criminal investigator, a career built on facts and evidence, things no one could dismiss as too sensitive. I thought the title would make them respect me, that my work would finally silence the mocking laughter. It didn't. To my parents, I was still the girl who cried on a plane, still one panic attack away from humiliating them in public. Then I had Sophie. My daughter was my second chance, my proof that gentleness wasn't weakness. She came into the world quiet and observant with big brown eyes that always seemed to be studying the room before deciding whether to smile. From the beginning, she was like me, and I swore that, unlike my parents, I would not dismiss her feelings. If she said she was scared, I took it seriously. If she cried, I held her instead of mocking her. And when my father once joked, "Here comes Drama Queen 2.0, I shut it down so sharply he never said it again in front of me. But you can't protect your child from everything, especially not from the family that raised you. When Sophie turned 15, she begged to go on a spring break trip with my parents, Mark, and her cousins. I hesitated, not because I didn't want her to see the world, but because I couldn't be the one to take her. Flying was still impossible for me. 10 years since I'd set foot in an airport, 10 years of sweaty palms just at the smell of jet fuel. My husband couldn't go either, work deadlines stacked too high. Sophie's face fell when I told her no, but then my mother called. "Don't worry, we'll take good care of her," she said. Mark added, "We'll keep an eye on her." Haley and Ben, his kids, were excited too. Then came the catch: could I chip in for their tickets since they'd be helping with Sophie? The request stung, but I paid. I wanted Sophie to feel included, wanted her to have the family experience I'd never had. I packed her suitcase myself, tucking her allergy meds into a side pocket, a backup charger, snacks, and little notes folded into corners, tiny reminders that I loved her. I kissed her goodbye in the driveway, waving until the car turned the corner. My chest was tight, but I told myself it was just separation anxiety. I ignored the little voice whispering that my parents hadn't changed, that Mark still believed my daughter was a reflection of me. 4 days later, Sophie called me on FaceTime. I answered with a smile, expecting a street market selfie or a bracelet she'd bargained for. Instead, she sat rigid on a hotel bed, her face pale. "I'm tired," she said softly. "Can I tell you something, but promise not to freak out?" Spoiler: I freaked out. Not on the outside, I kept my voice calm, but inside my heart slammed against my ribs like it wanted out. She turned the camera. Her leg rested on a pillow, swollen red, and purple skin stretched taut as though it might split. "I think I broke it," she whispered. For a second, my brain went blank. Then the questions tumbled out. When, how, who had looked at it? She told me she'd fallen yesterday on the stairs of an old palace they'd toured. She'd begged to see a doctor, but my parents and Mark thought it was just bruising. They made her keep walking. 3 hours, maybe more. They told me I was overreacting, she said. My chest tightened so hard, I thought I might faint. The words were familiar too. Familiar. Where are they now? I asked. She hesitated. Out. They left me at the hotel to rest. 15 years old. Alone. In another state. With a possibly broken leg. I froze. Then I said the words that changed everything. I'm coming to get you. Her eyes widened. But you'd have to fly. I know, I said. And for the first time in over a decade, I opened a browser and booked a flight. 90 minutes to take off. No time for fear, no time for hesitation. Just time to prove that no one would ever dismiss my daughter's pain again. The cab ride to the airport felt like moving through syrup. Every red light mocked me, every car that cut in front of us tightened the vice around my chest. I stared at my phone, at Sophie's last message, a single red heart emoji, as if that small icon could keep me breathing. When we pulled up to the terminal, I ran. I didn't think, didn't plan, just moved on pure adrenaline. My palms were slick, my jaw locked, my throat raw. With a scream I refused to release. The smell of jet fuel hit me like a punch. I almost turned back. 10 years since I'd walked into this building, 10 years of letting fear control every itinerary, every holiday, every decision. But Sophie's swollen leg flashed in my mind, and suddenly my fear seemed like the smallest thing in the world. I forced myself through check-in, through security, each step a battlefield. When the TSA agent asked me to remove my shoes, my knees nearly buckled, but I did it. I clutched my bag as if it were a lifeline. At the gate, the final boarding call echoed. I sprinted, lungs burning, heart hammering so loud I was sure people could hear it. I stumbled into my seat just as they closed the door. The woman beside me leaned her head against the window, already asleep, a bag of pretzels balanced on her chest. I envied her so fiercely it made me ache. For her, this was routine. For me, this was war. The plane jerked back from the gate, and my nails dug crescents into my palms. Memories rose like smoke, 10-year-old me sobbing through turbulence. Mark filming the family's laughter roaring louder than the engines. My mother's cold voice. You really need to grow out of this. I never did. I just stopped giving them opportunities to laugh. Until now. The engines roared. My stomach flipped. I whispered Sophie's name under my breath like a prayer. The wheels left the ground, and everything in me screamed to get off, to undo this decision. But there was no turning back. I had chosen. Fear or not, I was going to my daughter. Every bump made my heart jump into my throat. My palms stayed damp, my jaw locked, but I didn't cry. I didn't move. I stared ahead, forcing myself to remember that this wasn't about me anymore. Every voice in my head told me I was being dramatic, overreacting, too much, voices that sounded exactly like my mother's. I silenced them the only way I could, by staying on that plane. Hours later, I stumbled into a cab at the arrival terminal, muscles shaking from the effort of staying composed. The city outside the window blurred into meaningless shapes. My whole body buzzed, but my mind was sharp. I was going to get Sophie. When I reached the hotel and knocked the door open slowly, Sophie stood there in pajamas, pale, leaning heavily on the frame. Her hair was tangled, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. You actually came, she whispered. Those 3 words broke something in me. She hadn't been sure I would. She had thought maybe I'd let her pain be minimized, like mine always had been. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tight, whispering, Of course I came. You are the only reason on this planet I would ever get on a plane. She gave a shaky laugh, and for a second, she looked like the little girl who used to curl against me with picture books. I helped her dress, careful with her leg, arguing gently about the second shoe. She wanted to wear it. I refused. One look at her swollen ankle made the decision for us. She leaned on me as we made our way down to a cab. Every step she winced. Every step I felt my rage sharpen. On the way to the hospital, I asked how it happened. She hesitated, then admitted it hadn't been exactly a fall. Ben had shoved her as a joke while she was taking a picture. She'd missed a step, crashed hard, and the rest was history. My stomach dropped. "They all saw?" I asked. She nodded. "Grandma said she was being dramatic. Mark told her to stop scaring tourists." Grandpa wondered if she'd twisted it before the trip. I gripped her hand. "Sophie, someone pushes you downstairs, and your leg swells like that you don't protect them. Not even if they're family." At the ER, she found her courage. When the nurse asked how it happened, she answered clearly, "My cousin pushed me." I fell. No tears, no apology in her tone. Just fact. The nurse's pen scratched faster. The X-ray confirmed it, a non-displaced tibia fracture. "You're lucky it didn't shift," the doctor said. "If she had walked much more on this..." He trailed off, but I filled in the blanks. Surgery pins, months of rehab. My stomach twisted with rage. I stepped into the hall and called my parents. My father answered. "Is she okay?" he asked, not with worry, but with the wary tone of someone anticipating blame. I told him a doctor confirmed her leg was broken, that Ben had pushed her. He said it wasn't fair to phrase it like that Ben had just been playing around. "You all saw," I snapped, "and you made her walk for 3 hours. "Come on," he said. "Don't drag the whole family into court over a little accident." "Yes," I said coldly. "Yes, I will." I hung up. Back in the room, Sophie asked what Grandpa had said. I smiled grimly. "That I'm being irrational." She blinked, then laughed. "Good," she said. For the first time since I saw her swollen leg, I felt like maybe we were going to be okay. The hospital released Sophie with a cast and strict instructions: no weight-bearing crutches, at all times follow-up appointments. I thanked the staff with a kind of breathless gratitude that felt like a prayer. Then, in the sterile light of the discharge lounge, I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app. My fingers moved before my brain caught up medical neglect. Child endangerment. Failure to report injury. Beneath that one final line, "Not on my watch." That night, Sophie lay in the hotel bed, with her leg propped up on pillows, drifting in and out of uneasy sleep. I sat in a chair watching her chest rise and fall, and felt a new kind of rage growing inside me. This wasn't just about negligence. It was about history repeating itself. My parents had dismissed my pain my entire life, and now they were trying to erase hers too. They had taken my daughter's voice and labeled it drama, the way they had done to me for decades. But this time, I wasn't a child with no power. This time, I was going to fight. 2 days later, the footage arrived. A tourist had filmed the palace staircase, catching Sophie at the edge of the frame, smiling with her phone held high. Ben rushed up behind her, shoving her elbow. She tumbled forward out of sight. But the camera caught more than her fall. It caught my parents and Mark standing in the background watching. No one ran to help. No one moved. They just stood there, faces blank, as if my daughter's pain were invisible. My lawyer didn't send back words, only a single emoji, a hammer. That was enough. Filing meant logistics. It meant interviews, paperwork questions from detectives' flights back and forth. I hated every second of it. Each time I stepped onto a plane, my throat tightened, my stomach lurched, and I thought I might pass out. But each time, I remembered Sophie's voice saying, "You actually came." And I came again. And again. The first wave of fallout didn't come from the courtroom. It came to my porch. Mark showed up smug as ever, chest puffed out like a man used to being the golden child. "You're really doing this," he barked, his voice rising with every word. You're going to destroy us. I didn't flinch. I'm holding you accountable. There's a difference. He sneered. Over one little accident, you're going to drag your own family into court. You left my 15-year-old daughter alone in a hotel with a broken leg, I said. My voice was steady, colder than I expected. That's not an accident. That's neglect. He sputtered, but I shut the door before his words could stick. Then came my parents arriving together, a sure sign they had rehearsed their performance. My mother tried guilt first. We're your parents, Erica. What will people say if you take us to court? My father tried strategy. Drop it now, and we can all move on. Move on, I repeated, staring at them. She walked 3 hours on a broken leg because you decided tickets were more important than her pain. You saw her fall. You laughed at her. And you left her behind. Moving on isn't an option. Their faces hardened, and they stormed out. But they weren't finished. The phone calls started next. Aunt Janine, Cousin Rachel, even Uncle Marty, who hadn't spoken to me since 2006. Each one carrying the same line. Don't tear the family apart. Some begged, some scolded, some accused. My mother was a wreck, they said. Mark could lose his job, they said. Couldn't I just forgive? Couldn't I just let it go? So I told them the truth. I sent them the footage. The X-ray. The doctor's notes. The so-called drama. By the fourth call, the tone shifted. I had no idea, one cousin whispered. She was actually hurt, and they left her alone. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Court wasn't dramatic, not like television makes it. No gavels slammed, no gasps from the gallery. Just a weary judge-attorneys trading documents, evidence submitted like stones into a bucket, until the weight became undeniable. The verdict was clear: child endangerment, medical neglect, failure to report injury. My parents and Mark were all named. No one went to jail, but the fines were brutal. Enough to cut through pride like glass. And then came the consequence none of them had anticipated. Mark lost his job. Schools don't tend to keep PE teachers who have child endangerment charges on their record. 6 weeks later, my parents sold their house and moved into a smaller rental. They called it temporary, but cousins whispered they were already begging for rent money. They didn't ask me, though. They knew the answer. I had shut off the transfers, closed the side account I'd been feeding for years. No more help with groceries, no more just until next month. They were on their own now. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one carrying the family's burdens. I was carrying only my daughter's. And that was exactly enough. The weeks that followed were quieter, though not peaceful. Sophie adjusted to her cast and crutches, learning to maneuver through the house with the stubborn grace only teenagers can summon. She was quieter, yes, but not withdrawn. It was the kind of quiet that comes from certainty, from knowing her pain had been seen, believed, and defended. At night, while folding laundry together, she admitted something that pierced me. I think I would have just let it go if you hadn't stepped in, she said softly. She paused, then added, I didn't want to be dramatic. My chest ached. The phrase had haunted me all my life, stamped on every tear and tremor. And now, here it was, passed down like a curse. Except this time, I had caught it before it could root. You weren't dramatic, I told her firmly. You were hurt. That's not the same thing. She nodded, her face serious, and for the first time, I saw the seed of something new growing in her, a refusal to apologize for existing. Ben reached out too. A message appeared on Sophie's phone late one evening. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have pushed you. I thought it was funny. It wasn't. I hope your leg is okay. Sophie showed me the text without comment. Do you believe him? I asked. She shrugged. Yeah. I don't think anyone told him to write that. Then she put the phone down and didn't reply. Forgiveness wasn't a free pass. It was a choice, and she wasn't ready. I didn't push her either way. My parents, on the other hand, were relentless. They tried again after the court's decision showing up on my doorstep with a store-bought pie and brittle smiles. My mother's voice dripped with false sweetness. Surely now that it's all over, we can put this behind us. My father chimed in. Families fight, but families also forgive. I looked at them, really looked, and realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I had been. I was something else. Done. I told them we can move forward when you apologize without excuses, when you admit what you did was wrong. Until then, there's nothing to talk about. Their smiles cracked, and they left with the pie still in their hands. The phone calls slowed after that. Fewer relatives wanted to argue once they'd seen the footage, the x-rays, the medical records. Some apologized. Some simply fell silent. I didn't chase any of them. For the first time, I wasn't reaching out, wasn't patching holes, wasn't smoothing things over. I let the silence stretch and realized it wasn't scary, it was freeing. Meanwhile, Sophie healed. Physical therapy sessions became our routine, long afternoons spent in a rehab center with other kids nursing sports injuries. She learned to bend, stretch, strengthen, and eventually walk again. The first time she managed a few steps without crutches, her grin lit the whole room. I nearly cried right there on the gym floor. But instead, I smiled back, steady and proud. She didn't need my tears. She needed my presence. Flying became part of my life again, though not by choice. There were follow-up hearings, lawyer meetings, work cases that demanded travel. Each time I boarded with trembling hands, but I boarded. I threw up once in an airport bathroom and cried silently on a red-eye flight, but I never turned back. Fear was still there, but it had lost its power to decide for me. Sophie teased me gently about my white-knuckled grip on the armrest, but she always reached over and laced her fingers with mine. Sometimes that was all it took to breathe. Mark's downfall was swifter than he ever expected. He had always been the golden boy, the one teachers praised, the one neighbors admired. Losing his job wasn't just about money, it was about identity. He confronted me one last time, spitting accusations on my front lawn. "You've ruined my life," he said. "No," I told him quietly. "You did that when you chose pride over responsibility." He stormed off, and I haven't seen him since. As for my parents, their pride took longer to unravel. They moved into a smaller house, then an apartment each step down, disguised as temporary. Cousins whispered about overdue bills and pawned jewelry. They never asked me for help, not once. They knew the door was closed. At night, when the house was quiet, I sometimes thought about that girl on the hotel bed whispering, "You actually came." The surprise in her voice cut me deeper than any insult my family had ever thrown. I wondered how many times she had doubted me without saying it aloud, how many times I had inadvertently mirrored the dismissals I grew up with. That thought haunted me more than the court case, more than the flying, more than the fractured bone. But then Sophie would smile at me across the dinner table, or lean her head against my shoulder during a movie, or laugh with her whole body, unafraid to take up space. And I knew I had changed the ending. Finality doesn't arrive with a gavel bang or a slammed door. It creeps in slowly through ordinary days that stay ordinary. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring, wasn't bracing for the next guilt trip or demand. My parents' numbers still lit up my screen sometimes, but I let them fade into missed calls. I didn't block them. I didn't post about them. I simply stopped giving them access. Silence for once wasn't punishment. It was peace. One afternoon, Sophie and I sat in the park, her cast finally gone, the sun catching on her hair as she tested her leg against the grass. She jogged a few hesitant steps, then laughed pure and unrestrained. She came back and dropped onto the bench beside me, breathless but proud. "Do you think they hate us now?" she asked casually, as if asking about the weather. Maybe, I admitted. Or maybe they're too busy being angry at themselves. She tilted her head, thoughtful. I don't want to hate them, but I don't want them near me either. Boundaries. She had learned them at 15, a lesson I hadn't mastered until my 30s. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders and kissed her hair. That's not hate, I said. That's wisdom. Later that night, I pulled out a box I'd kept tucked in the closet for years. Inside were remnants of my childhood photos from holidays, where my smile looked pasted on birthday cards with backhanded jokes, old VHS tapes I couldn't bear to watch. I shuffled through them like evidence not of crimes, but of patterns. I wrote a letter I never intended to send. You loved us in the only way you knew how, with rules and ridicule with pride, masquerading as care. But love without accountability is just control. I am not punishing you. I am choosing my daughter over your denial. Then I folded the letter and slipped it back into the box. Closure isn't always fire. Sometimes it's simply deciding what no longer belongs in the present. Work colleagues sometimes asked in clipped tones over coffee if I regretted it taking my parents and brother to court. I always answered honestly no. Not because it was easy, not because it felt good, but because it was necessary. Accountability isn't betrayal. Silence would have been. Sophie still carried traces of the experience. She didn't flinch when people doubted her anymore. She didn't second-guess every feeling. The quiet she held now wasn't shame, it was strength. She knew deep in her bones that her pain was real and that her voice mattered. Watching her grow into that knowledge was like watching a flower finally bloom after years of bad weather. As for me, flying never became easy. My palms still sweat at takeoff. My stomach still lurches in turbulence, but I board anyway. I've flown for court hearings for work and even for a weekend trip with Sophie to celebrate her healing. Each time I carry fear with me like a stubborn passenger, but I don't let it drive. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's showing up while fear rides shotgun. Sometimes late at night, I replay that first FaceTime call in my head, Sophie on the hotel bed, whispering, "You actually came." I think about how close I came to proving her wrong, how easily I could have let fear or denial dictate my choice. And I think about how different everything might have been if I hadn't boarded that plane. So, did I go too far? Some people still whisper that I did, that I should have forgiven, should have let it slide for the sake of family. But I know the truth. The only thing I went too far in was letting them get away with it for as long as I did. Standing up for Sophie wasn't destruction, it was protection. And if there's a lesson in all of this, it's that family isn't defined by silence or sacrifice. Family is defined by who shows up, who listens, who believes you when you say you're hurting. I still don't speak to my parents or my brother. The distance feels less like loss and more like healing. Sophie and I have built something new, a home, without dismissals, where laughter doesn't come at someone else's expense, where fear isn't mocked, but met with understanding. It's not perfect, but it's ours. If you've ever been told you're too sensitive, too dramatic, too much, hear this: you are not too much. You are exactly enough. And when someone tries to erase your pain, remember that silence doesn't protect you. It only protects the people who hurt you. Sophie doesn't say you actually came anymore. She says, of course you did. And that small shift, that quiet certainty, is everything I ever wanted to give her. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment about the boundaries you've set in your own life. I'd love to hear them. Together we can remind each other that being believed is not a privilege, it's a right.